with the time at now 9:25 p.m, with 5 minutes to go before I actually switch the transmitter there on, I can use this opportunity to say that tonight we're going to be covering telephone technology related to ham radio through its electronics and audio, of course. And many of the people involved with ham radio have been involved with telecommunications of the telephone network over the last 100 years. More than that. So tonight I've gathered together 10 separate films, short films, that cover the technology of the telephone, basically from the end of the manual exchange system through Strauger, uniselector dialing, and finally through into microwave technology in the 1960s. So I hope that this will be of interest to the telecommunications people that are watching. This has been a fairly momentous week in several ways. First of all, of course, we've lost Queen Elizabeth II. We now have King Charles III, who I sincerely hope doesn't reach the same end as King Charles I, becoming divorced from his head. But he is facing a rapidly disintegrating empire with a lot of baggage, and one can only hope that the guy will measure up to the very high standard that Elizabeth II set. Anyway, remains to be seen. The other area I should mention for those that are interested in ham radio and technology is that this week a group of us, VK3STL, VK3TET, myself and a few others involved with digital slow scan television, have been experimenting with the digital transmission of a new type of picture file that's been tentatively intended to replace, eventually, the JPEG system. It's called the AVIF system, the .AVIF, Alpha Victor India Foxtrot. And it produces pictures equivalent to JPEG in between a half and a quarter the file size, which has obvious transmission advantages when you have a narrow bandwidth system you're trying to feed it through. It's like trying to push something very broad through the eye of a needle, on HF radio particularly. But we've been transmitting pictures of pretty impressive definition in less than the 3-minute compass of our existing transmit times for digital pictures with the so-called EasyPal freeware system, devised originally by a VK4, Eric Sundstrup, VK4 AES, who died in 2015. So now, having got this new picture codec, the AVIF codec, we're looking around for a software modem system that can convey the picture files in slightly greater time, slightly greater speed, I should say, than the existing EasyPal software. And I believe that most radios of this VHF type I've got now have a digital input that's capable of 9600 baud speed. So it should be possible, combining the 9600 baud speed, or something close to it, with the AVIF file compression system to get really impressive slow scan pictures, either over HF or VHF. More likely VHF initially, because we don't have selective fade or noise really to overcome there. So there's been some significant developments with digital slow scan TV, the AVIF compression system being tried and found very successful. And the rest I'll cover in tonight's video presentation on the telephone. So it's coming up for 9:30 p.m. Putting on the requisite headphones and keying up. Hello, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima in Burwood East with the regular Saturday night test transmission of technical material. This week dealing with the telephone technology from the manual exchange period, turn of the 20th century, through to microwave relays of the 1960s, and we'll examine this in 10 successive short film segments, the first few of which are silent. I'll have to narrate them, and the rest starting in 1933 with the film marking the introduction of the dial telephone to England. So anyway, with thanks to the Australian Telecommunications Museum, I'll show you the first items that lead on from last week's transmission. And, oh, that's interesting. We have no stream. Or do we? I really don't know. I'll open up YouTube again. This is a major stuff-up, folks. I don't know why we've suddenly got no indication of stream, but going to YouTube Studio and create, go live. What do I see? We have an excellent connection, which absolutely floors me. Well, what do you know? With apologies to people for the stuff-up, I'll continue. The National Telecommunications Museum for Australia is at 375 Burwood Road, Hawthorn. And following last week's transmission where I talked about the Bell telephone from 1876 that was imported to Australia by Bell's uncle and is now held by the Museum of Victoria, we discovered that there's almost as early an instrument made locally in the Australian Telecommunications Museum, and here it is. It's made in Geelong, of all places. And in spite of the tag on the instrument, it's made in 1877. It's a sound-powered telephone of the Bell type, built into a little box. You yell down this device to generate enough power to be heard on a similar instrument at the other end of the line. And this was used between Geelong and Queenscliff and Geelong and Melbourne, unsuccessfully in the case of Geelong and Melbourne, successfully in the case of Geelong and Queenscliff. It was made by J Thomas of Geelong, as you see there, and used between Geelong and Ballarat during 1878. Thomas was a member of Her Majesty's Customs Department at Geelong, and apparently a very resourceful chap. In a moment you'll see this cutting from the Geelong Advertiser, 28th December 1877. I won't read it all, except to say that this is a report of telephone conversations across Mr. Thomas's very large property, from an outbuilding to his home, that was preparatory to the much longer speech transmission between Geelong and Queenscliff, which came in 1878. So anybody who'd like to read that whole extract can freeze frame on it. Incidentally, for those who are listening on 147.475, we're actually live streaming. If you care to Google VK3AML 10 September 2022, that's Google the phrase VK3AML 10 September 2022. You'll pick up the video side of this on YouTube live streaming. So back to the live stream. Freeze frame on that article if you want to read it. It should be quite readable in 1080p definition. So to continue, another thing that came up last week was Alexander Graham Bell's voice. We'll come to that in a minute. But first of all, Geelong has another claim to fame in telephone history, and that is in this GPO, the first automatic telephone exchange in the Southern Hemisphere was actually established in Geelong in July 1912, only 3 months after the first automatic telephone exchange in London at Epsom. So this has quite a claim to fame. They used for the automatic exchange Strauger switching uniselectors. This is a diagram of the uniselectors that were used, quite complex mechanical devices relying on multiple pulses being sent down the line from rotary dials. And that is the Epsom exchange as it was in 1912. And there is one of the new British telephones with the dial on. The test bench at the Epsom Exchange, 1912, and the wiring loom, the first of many thousands of them around the world. The battery room. Batteries were earlier held at each subscriber's home inside their telephone, but they decided to centralise them in the telephone exchanges. That's a typical very early 1912 dial telephone of British origin, and I must say that my parents' home had one of those exact types on the wall back in the 1950s when I can first remember it. The advent of the dial telephone, and there's a cutting from the London Times, 17th of May 1912, detailing the so-called automatic telephone experiment to get rid of the hello girls. Using rotary dial telephones generating pulses and step switching at the exchange. And we'll see quite a bit of that tonight, how this was all done. Something else that comes of last week's transmission. We heard a recording of the voice of Alexander Graham Bell, and somebody asked if there's any film of him. Well, yes, there is, but not related to the telephone. By the turn of the century, he was involved with aviation and high-speed water transport, and was involved with the invention of what we'd now call the hydrofoil. And here's Graham Bell at the wheel of the then fastest watercraft in the world, a hydrofoil of his own invention. His wife actually hated this film. She made him promise never to go in this machine, to leave it to others. There he is, 72 years old in 1919, with his grandson. And ingenious foils make this flying fish unmindful of rough seas. F.W. Baldwin, co-inventor, pilots. And you can see the speed they're doing there. This is not undercranked. I'm projecting the film at silent speed. Quite a clip being done because, of course, those foils are lifting the hull of the ship out of the water. The trick was to make it still controllable. And this principle underlay the high-speed Sydney ferries of the 1970s. Only recently replaced, actually. Graham Bell and the hydrofoil, 1919. So there's a bit of motion picture of Alexander Graham Bell and his hydrofoil. He was also involved with aviation at the turn of the century, tetrahedral kites and such. In transmitting the words over a wire to his assistant in an adjoining room, "Mr. Watson, please come here, I want you," Dr. Graham Bell in 1876 gave us an instrument destined to annihilate both time and space, the very first speaking telephone, and there it is, from 1876. 43 years later, 1915, Dr. Bell repeated the words to Mr. Watson across the American continent through the means of the new transcontinental telephone. Wireless on March 24, 1922, when WGY Schenectady, New York, broadcast a radio concert which swept the world. Note the microphone on the left, carbon with a funnel on the front of it. It aroused public interest and brought forth countless inquiries for an explanation of the mysterious radio telephony. As the telephone plays such an important part in radio telephony, we will first consider the structure and function of the telephone. And here we are undoing the microphone, carbon mic, of a candlestick phone, consisting of a mouthpiece which concentrates the sound waves, a diaphragm, and a resistance cell, a carbon granule cell at the back of the diaphragm. The resistance cell is filled with granulated carbon. One electric wire is attached to the diaphragm, and the other to the cell. Sound waves entering the mouthpiece cause the diaphragm to vibrate. The diaphragm vibrations compress and release the carbon particles. Thus changing the resistance, which permits more or less current to flow through the circuit. The principle of the carbon microphone. And you can actually see the electrons moving along there. For convenience of illustrating, we will connect an ordinary telephone receiver, as the principles are the same as in other receivers. And there's the receiver with a triode. It comprises a permanent magnet which attracts an iron diaphragm. There's the insert. There's the diaphragm, the pole pieces and the coils. Magnetic. And a diagrammatic representation. Iron diaphragm. A coil is placed on each end of the magnet. There you see it. Current passing through the coils neutralise the magnet and release the diaphragm. And there's the plate current flowing from a triode. The motion of the diaphragm reproduces the sound waves which enter the transmitter. And thus get heard. Now, some new terms that came into the vocabulary in the 1920s. A calculograph, an accurate timing device which records the elapsed time of long-distance telephone calls. You'll see two levers on the device. And a clock. There's the operator taking your call. One guy at one end of the conversation. And she records the coil. Connects them. The old manual exchange days, remember? This was taken in 1927. The other end of the call, and they are put in contact. So they have a chat. The lady puts a ticket into the calculograph which prints the start time of the talk. And she waits while the calculograph times the call. She works on other calls. The two men hang up. She puts the card back in, pulls the second lever, and that records the finishing time of the call. So this is a way of increasing the speed of the recording system, the calculograph. Now a little chap will show us the next thing to be described, which has to do with lightning protection. A protector, a device that protects the telephone from lightning and other electrical disturbances. And this is the standard American lightning protection circuit of the mid-1920s, using carbon rods, I believe, and connected to the house hot water system. I hope it's not the gas pipe. Here are the fuses that prevent excessive current from reaching your telephone. And there we see the carbon fuses. They blow high. These carbon blocks connected to a grounded water pipe are a protection against lightning. Well, they hope. I doubt that a direct strike would do very much other than blowing the crap out of this whole system. There are the carbon blocks, the old system. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission and live stream on YouTube. Another term. Telephone typewriter, known later as the teleprinter. Here is a 1920s teleprinter, looking very much like a Remington typewriter with a few motors shoved on the front. The electrical impulses operating this machine are being transmitted over a long-distance telephone line from a telephone typewriter located hundreds of miles away. And here's the transmitting end. And now with the cover taken off, you can see the intricacies of the device. Today, telephone typewriters are used by business concerns, newspapers, airports, police. There's the police department. And here we have a chap operating one of the telephone transmitters. Teletype transmitters, I should say. I'm not sure whether this would be Creed or what system it would be. Somebody actually might inform us. And being used here for police work. As I say, this is about 1928. Stolen 1928 Auburn Cabriolet Black at 8 p.m, 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. Engine number, etc., etc. And there are the rolls of teletype. Suspension strand, a stranded steel wire generally used to support the heavy aerial copper telephone cable. Not sure whether we'd call this a suspension wire now, more a catenary support. And there are the linesmen of 1928. A brave lot. Notice they're going up with spiked boots. There are no actual ladder holes or ladder cantilevers on that. The spiked boots that allow you to crawl straight up the wooden pole. Wouldn't be the sort of job I'd like to have. And now pulling up the telephone cable. Bolt cutters to cut the cable. It's obviously a fairly long cable as it's so thick. Has to hold quite a bit of weight from the copper. Oh, they didn't have OH&S in 1928, did they? There's the guy putting the supports in. Suspended from the steel cable. Let's hope that the anchoring at the ends was good. And putting on loops that he's discharging out of a bucket in his lap. And coming down the pole again on his spiked boots. Western Electric reel of cable there. And there's the cable truck. I couldn't quite read the brand name on the radiator. Elite or something? I'm not quite sure. Thickness of the cable is quite impressive. It must be about 3/4 of an inch, that support cable. And there we go, the way telephone lines were suspended in 1928. And now our little animated friend is going to tell us that's all this time, and that's the end of this film from 28. We move on to a film showing how to use a dial telephone. Now, this will be second knowledge to anybody of my age or anybody over 40. But to those under 40 who have never seen a dial telephone, have always used the press button variety, this will be news, as it was to people in 1927 when the film was made. Dial telephones will be placed in service at midnight Saturday, May 28, 1927. The new telephone directory, the Blue Book, should not be used until then. So this is obviously a film made for one particular area to show people how to use the new dial telephones. Not just a matter of picking up the phone and saying hello and the person at the other end says, "Number please." Important, do not use this directory until midnight, May 28th. May 28th, 1927. 95 years ago. And here we revert to a bit of animation, indicating the date for the changeover. Must have been a big, momentous event too. Suppose you want to call Roth Brothers 723G. First, obtain the correct number from the directory. Directories. Who remembers telephone directories? They're a thing of the past now too. But then we have internet to look up the numbers. And here is Miss Bell Telephone of 1927 with her Marcel wave and the beads around the neck, very 1927, looking up the phone number in the then new phone number for the automatic dialing system. This was putting a lot of the effort in finding the distant number on the consumer. Roth Brothers number is 36623. Remove the receiver carefully so as not to jiggle the switch hook. All details that people had to learn. If you jiggled the switch hook, it would dial 1. Listen for the dial tone. Brrr. The dial tone is a steady humming sound indicating that the line is ready for you to dial. This was all new in 1927. At least in this part of America. Brrr. What to dial? She trepidously picks up the receiver on her candlestick phone and she dials the number for the first time. And there's the telephone dial down at the bottom of the candlestick. What a price those things would go for now. Pull the dial around until the finger touches the finger stop. Something that we all used to do up to the 1980s. Dials 3. Release the dial and allow it to return to the normal position. And apologies for the noisiness of my fans in my power supply. Repeat the action with the figure 6. Finger in the hole, turn it round, hit the dial stop, pull out. Then 6. Finger in the hole, turn it round, pull out. Then 2. Same again. Then 3. Pull it round, same again. You have now dialed 36623. Note, the dash is not dialed. 3-6623. You will then hear the busy signal, burp, 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 or the ringing signal, ring, 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 ring. Apologies for the effects. The busy signal is a rapid buzz, 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 telling you that the called line is busy. And she doesn't look too impressed, that character, does she? The busy signal, hang up the receiver and call your party a little later while your frustrations rise. The ringing signal is an intermittent burring sound, burp, 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 telling you that the bell of the called telephone is ringing. None of this was obvious to people in 1927. Not when you were used to number, please, at the other end of the line. If the called party does not answer within a reasonable length of time, hang up the receiver. Looking suitably disappointed. The tear-stained telephone. If the party you want to call is not listed in the directory, dial the numeral 8 for information. Apparently that was the standard method in America. They dialed 8. If only it was that simple now. 1-800, I think it is now, in this country. So she's checking the numbers in her directory, doesn't find it. Big sigh. I'm going to have to dial 8. Finger in the 8 hole. Turn it round to the stop. Let it out. And there are the operators at the then internet of the time, namely filing books with thousands of numbers in them, with quite a few operators pulling books off shelves and looking things up as fast as they can. A sweatshop. Mind you, I know a few people who live in call centres that tell me it's as bad there now. Operators looking up numbers for frustrated customers. Imagine all of the flack they must have got, particularly with the new dial system coming in and people blaming the dialing. Miss Marcel Wave of 1927 talking to the operator, and she notes down the number. Important. Use a pen. Have a pen handy. Thank you. If after several attempts you are unable to obtain the number you want, dial operator OPERATOR O for assistance. 0 O for operator. Right around and let it run. You will get the wrong number if dialing is started before taking the receiver off the hook. Yes, some people would actually do that if they weren't told otherwise. Dialing while the receiver is on the hook. Yes, some people are that thick. We're in 1927 and most likely still are. And there's somebody dialing with the receiver on the hook, being a total idiot. No, that ain't going to work. And the pointing finger pointing at, take the thing off the hook, then dial, you idiot. There we go. And now we're dialing up. This is VK3AML. If dial is released before the finger reached the finger stop, like that, you'll get the wrong number. If the switch hook is moved accidentally during the dialing period, while you're dialing you bump the switch hook, like her arm does. Oh dear, dear, dear. And now we go across to the British equivalent, a film made by the GPO film unit in 1933. And the fact that this is a sound film will relieve me from a lot of pressure. This is VK3AML. Anybody listening on 147.475, if you care to Google VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, VK3AML 10 September 2022, that is Google VK3AML 10 September 2022, and you'll find the video that goes with this audio. Back to the video, The Coming of the Dial, 1933.
research, the creative power behind the modern world, building the future in the laboratory. The industrial chemist, determining a carbon percentage for a safety steel. The physicist, analyzing colored light rays for signal lenses. The plant breeder, pollinating selected grasses for mountain pastures. These men are applying the laws of science to everyday problems. And research into the behavior of electromagnets has revolutionized the telephone system and introduced the dial. In the laboratories of Dollis Hill, they are testing specimen telephones for the dial system. First, a volume test by comparison with a standard instrument.
One, two, three, four, five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Second, a durability test on the receivers of candlestick telephones. Third, a test of transmission and reception efficiency to determine the sensitivity of the latest type of instrument. This sound is made by an oscillator, covering the entire frequency range of the human voice in the space of a second. It's a synthetic voice, telling the engineer how every word of every language will sound through the telephone under test. The gauge before him is measuring its efficiency in units of sound volume, decibels. Ever since 1879, when the first English telephone exchange was opened at Manchester, the switchboards have been designed for manual working. The coming of the dial demands a new network of exchanges to house the delicate mechanisms which convert impulses into telephone calls. These statistics, collected over years of telephone practice, tell the designer how much conversational traffic each new exchange must handle, and at what times of the day it will be heaviest. So he calculates the particular needs of each district in terms of traffic averages and telephone densities. On this basis, the plans for each new exchange are drawn. So the plans of the draftsman take shape in steel and concrete, and new buildings appear against the London sky. Here, between St. Paul's and the river, the old order is changing. The complexities of modern business and modern commerce demand the closest contact between office and warehouse, buyer and seller, wholesaler and retailer, stockbroker and investor, and between people who simply want to talk to each other. New methods replace old, and this building rises above the city to act as the nerve center of a new system of communication. 15 feet below the streets, the wires from every part of the city emerge from the earth to the new exchange. They come from the offices, the banks, the shops, the distant exchanges, linking every part of the city together. Countless pairs of tiny wires, protected in stout, lead-sheathed cables, leading up from under the city, through the silent cable chamber, through the floors of the exchange, millions of wires representing telephone access to the entire world. Here, on the distribution frame, is the converging point of 10,000 pairs of private telephone lines. And this delicate complexity of switches and contacts, relays and impulse machines, is the mechanism behind the dial. It has been evolved through years of patient research into the mysteries of magnetic control. And it is the answer of the mathematician and the engineer to the modern demands for speed and organization. "19,000 switches in a single exchange. From 72 to 600 contacts on every switch. And post office engineers must examine every contact before the apparatus can be passed as perfect. Each of the 3 moving arms of the switch must make perfect connection with both the upper and lower surfaces of the contact, or transmission and reception will be faulty. So the engineer uses an ordinary dental mirror to aid him in his examination. 19,000 switches controlled from the 10 finger holes on the dial, and every switch must be tested out on each dial level. No ordinary room lights will reveal the minute details of this mechanism. Every engineer in the automatic exchange wears a headlamp, throwing a direct beam in his line of sight. $8.5 million soldered connections, and each connection is checked carefully over. For this machinery will work 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, clattering on year after year until new electrical discoveries replace it. In the top floor switch room of the exchange is the only vestige of human control. However perfect the mechanical system may be, human frailties must still be taken into account. This is the personal service still available behind the rattle and buzz of the switches. But the old equipment of manual working, plugs, jacks, and keys, has disappeared, superseded by the ordered banks of automatic apparatus. A new telephone system has replaced the old. When the receiver is lifted, You're automatically connected to a series of switches in your local exchange. As you begin to dial, the first of these switches comes into operation. It interprets the first letter of the exchange you're calling. Now this switch selects from the thousands of wires available one pair which will carry your call to the distant exchange. Now you dial out the number you want. And as you do so, this mechanical operator comes into play. It stores up the electrical impulses from the dial until the switches in the distant exchange are ready to receive them. Then it flashes the impulses from the dial along the wires, figure by figure, switch by switch. First the thousands. Next the hundreds. Then the tens. And finally the digits. In this way, one telephone out of the 750,000 in the London district is selected. And these are the automatic alarms. In this way, every human mistake and every disturbance of efficiency are reported to the engineers. In London, as in every modern city, communications are the life arteries of commerce. Once more, the laws of science have been applied to an everyday problem, and this dial system is a vital contribution to efficiency and speed.
Now, forward to the post-war period.
The future can be found in many places. It can be seen reflected in the eyes of those who are privileged to look at it. Here at this Bell telephone exhibit, it can be found in the shape and form and made from the metal and the wire, the time and the effort of those who are privileged to create it. Now I'd like to show you what our recent development, the transistor, may do for future telephone service. First, I'm going to throw this switch and turn back the clock to the days before you could talk on the telephone over distances of, say, several hundred miles. Now, I want you all to listen in while I talk on this telephone. Well, I don't think any of you could really understand what I was saying, but let's throw another switch. And start coming back to the present.
Now you can hear me clearly over a line that represents the same distance.
That's because we now use repeater units containing sound amplifying vacuum tubes to give your voice a boost as it goes across country.
Tomorrow we'll still be hearing as well as previously.
But look how small this repeater unit is. This smaller, easier to make amplifier was made possible by developing the transistor, a tiny piece of sound amplifying equipment that requires no warm-up time and has an almost indefinite lifespan. Our research people are hard at work finding out what else it may be able to do. The air above the Earth serves as a highway for something else that can be heard but not seen. The only visible sign of these conversations is the radio relay tower they come from, through whose lens pass microwave radio beams, carrying not only the telephone messages you speak, but the radio programs you hear, the television shows you see, to the next tower on a hilltop 25 miles away, which receives the signal and sends it to the next hilltop tower, and so on until its destination is reached. Another communications highway of the present and the future is to be found in coaxial cable. The basic coaxial cable can handle 1,800 telephone conversations at one time, and that's a lot of telephone service. Not to forget television programs, teletypewriter news services, and radio programs. Coaxial cable like this has already crisscrossed the country, pushed past some of our last frontiers, guided by a 20th century type of pioneer who swapped his covered wagon and team of oxen for a diesel-powered cable plow and left in his wake not a wagon trail, but a network of electronic highways. Another frontier in the everlasting campaign to improve service is to be found in the town of Media, Pennsylvania, not far from Philadelphia. It's Monday morning in Media, and Mrs. Douglas of the Hillcrest Avenue Douglases can hardly wait to telephone Philadelphia to order a real bargain she spotted in her Sunday paper. There she goes. It's an out-of-town call, but she dials the number directly without having to reach an operator. One of the most important problems that had to be solved to furnish this service was finding a way of automatically keeping track of how long Mrs. Douglas's conversation lasted, the telephone number she called, and telephone number, so she could be correctly billed. This array of impressive-looking equipment in the central office went into action to do just that. It's not enough for the equipment to remember, it's got to make a record as well. Here at this recorder, the billing information from Mrs. Douglas's call and others from Media is punched out in code on a reel of tape. At an accounting center in Philadelphia, the information is processed by machines which have had such brains and skill that they can translate the coded perforations into a record. Efficient as this equipment is, it's but an early step in the development of an automatic message accounting system. In the laboratories, the men who develop new equipment and the men who will have to build it are always at work, not only improving what has been developed, but creating new things as well. Like the latest crossbar switching system, whose automatic switching of telephone calls has made possible operator toll dialing. However, it's one thing for highly skilled scientists, technicians to develop our equipment in the laboratory, and quite another to mass produce it on a production line.
What goes into it? Where do we get it? How much does it cost? What are the conditions under which it must be handled? What tools will be required for its assembly? What production procedures will be followed? What skills will be required by people employed in this operation? What training will they need in addition to their previous experience? Is adequate test equipment available? What rate of production is indicated by the specifications?
In this case, as in all cases, the combination of Western Electric working with the Bell Laboratories on crossbar switching equipment from the very beginning made it possible for those questions to be answered before they were ever asked, and paved the way for operator toll dialing, a new technique in telephone service that makes it possible for operators to dial long-distance calls directly without going through other operators along the way or at the distant place. That's quite an improvement in long-distance service when you consider that in 1927, if you wanted to make a long-distance call, you picked up your telephone and then something like this took place.
Number, please.
May I have long distance?
One moment, please. This is long distance.
I want to call Chicago. The number is Wabash, 2098.
Thank you. We will call you when ready with Chicago.
The long-distance operator passed the call on to a line operator who found an available line to Chicago, and over it reached an operator at the incoming switchboard for Chicago long-distance calls.
Chicago.
Wabash, 2098.
The Chicago operator put the call through to the Wabash central office.
Wabash.
2098.
And finally, the operator was able to ring your party. Time required, about 5 minutes on the average. And in 1927, that was good long-distance service. Today, in many places, with many more on the way, you give your long-distance operator the number, and she calls into action the crossbar dial switching system, which sets in motion the corresponding equipment in Chicago. And the next thing you know, Wabash 2098 is ringing. Time required, about 1 minute. We've come a long way since 1927 because we wanted to come a long way. What's made it tough has been the complicated equipment necessary to give telephone service. When we develop something new, it's a physical impossibility and financially impractical to rip out everything we have in service one day and replace it with all new equipment the next. Besides, who is to tell this man that his call is not so important but that it can wait? Or this girl? The country's telephone service can't be turned off while the telephone company changes over to new models. Wherever you go in the Bell system, from the operators at the other end of your line who take pride in the part they play in furnishing your telephone service, to the construction people who see to it that tomorrow's telephone lines are put in today, you will find telephone people building for the future.
The flame-like patterns you have just seen were pictures of musical sounds. Similar patterns also are made of voice sounds. For the spoken word is, of course, the most important sound studied in telephone research. If my voice sounds familiar to you, it is probably because you have heard me on the Bell Systems radio program, The Telephone Hour. I'm Tom Shirley. Usually, I talk about the things telephone people are doing to serve you and your neighbors. Sometimes I tell about the research work done at the Bell Telephone Laboratories to help your telephone company make your service better and keep its cost to you as low as possible. So you can imagine that we of the telephone hour were much pleased when we got a call from one of the research men.
Well, there is a way you could help us besides telling about our work. We'd like to be present at one of your telephone hour rehearsals to make high-fidelity recordings of some of the instruments of the orchestra.
Men in particular?
Say the harp, the cello, and the flute. We want to use them in our study of the characteristics of sound.
Sounds interesting. But tell me, why music?
Well, as you know, we carry the music of radio and television over the same telephone network that carries the telephone calls. But more important, the study of ways to transmit music has had a lot to do with the good telephone service we have today.
Okay. Why not come next Monday?
Fine. Then we'll be there at rehearsal next Monday afternoon.
Be looking for you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And so this film has been made to show you some of the research work going on to improve the telephone. And at the same time, we hope you will enjoy a brief glimpse of the telephone hour.
That was really wonderful. I'm sure glad we stayed.
So am I. I wouldn't miss that for anything.
Yes, at the Bell Telephone Laboratories, scientists and engineers study spoken words, music, and many other kinds of sound so that you can hear more clearly and easily over your telephone. Here they are translating into visible patterns the music samples recorded at the telephone hour rehearsal.
You'll note that these are effectively a very early form of paper waterfall display, with frequency on one axis, time on another axis, and intensity in the darkness or lightness of the trace. Waterfall displays in the embryo.
Any portion of that sound can be picked out and reproduced for better study in the form of the flame-like patterns. The music of the flute and of the cello are very different to the ear. Everyone knows the flute has a purer, more piercing tone. The flute sound has narrow energy peaks and few harmonics, while the cello sound had over a broad harmonic pattern. These wall charts are pictures of voice sounds. It is years of study of voices and music that have made possible the telephone service we have today. Let's consider for a moment the telephone in your own home. When you pick it up to make a call, you use it with confidence. You expect it to work properly. You expect to hear and to be heard clearly, naturally.
Hello, Dorothy. This is Margaret. I'm calling about...
But this didn't just happen.
Yes, it's going to...
Your telephone was designed and built, you might say tailor-made, to respond faithfully to the harmonic patterns of your voice. Years of research in sound have produced the telephone instrument. Endless tests have been made to be sure that the transmitter and receiver, their very shape and size, will have uniform response to all frequencies in the fluctuating valleys and peaks of speech. The very heart of these studies is this small condenser microphone. It is the measuring unit that accurately records the slightest sound. It never changes, regardless of temperature or humidity. It makes possible the delicate measurements that tell the scientist the effect of the changes he has made. This tiny microphone came out of research in devices to reproduce faithfully speech and music. This same measuring unit is used at the plants of Western Electric to test every telephone instrument before it is placed in service. If the moving dot on the screen follows a path like this, the handset is performing properly. Your telephone passed this exacting test to ensure that it would faithfully reproduce your voice. But important as it is, the work in sound research is only a part of the Bell Telephone Laboratory's job of making your telephone service ever better and of greater value to you. Other scientists work constantly on the telephone instrument itself, seeking ways to make it more efficient, more durable, and easier to use. The instrumentation laboratory is equipped with all the necessary measuring and analyzing devices, because research is essentially measurement, often incredibly fine measurement. It is in this way that telephone research charts its path as it moves ahead. With this equipment, impurities in materials on the order of 1 part in a billion may be detected. Such extreme precision is necessary in many fields. It was necessary in the development of a new refining technique for germanium, in which the molecules of the metal are actually rearranged. This is germanium, the metal that made possible the Bell Telephone Laboratory's great development, the transistor, the most important invention in electronics since the vacuum tube. A new device that can do many of the jobs done by the vacuum tube and many the tube can't do. As to wires and cables, they are giving better and more economical telephone service because telephone scientists and engineers have found ways to send many conversations over the same pair of wires at the same time. Here is one type of coaxial cable. As many as 1,800 telephone conversations can be sent at the same time over a pair of coaxial tubes like these. Or a pair of tubes can carry 600 telephone conversations as well as 2 television programs. Exploration in still another field, microwaves, paved the way for another method of communication, radio relay. Telephone research is thus constantly finding new ways to make your telephone service better, to bring you the voices of friends, the pictures of television, and the music of radio.
We're very fortunate that the transmission of music, at least for short bursts, is not illegal in this country. Anyway, it'll finish soon. This is VK3AML. If you want to look in on the video side of this transmission, please Google VK3AML 10 September 2022 and you'll find our YouTube live stream. That's Google VK3AML 10 September 2022. Back to the documentary. Zeno Francescati and conductor Don Voorhees. Don Voorhees, who was prominent in jazz in the 20s. And this is filmed in 1954.
So that's our story. We hope you enjoyed the music. And equally important, we hope we have helped you to understand more about the work of the telephone scientists in making it possible for you to talk around the world or across the street.
And now, specially for Rowley in Auckland, the New Zealand National Film Unit with coverage of their telephone system in 1953.
2 pounds of butter, packet of raisins, 4 pounds of sugar. Let me see now. I'm sure there was something else I wanted.
I've tried everything and still she won't go. Yes, I've tried that. It looks like a tone job to me.
Yes. Yes.
My husband wouldn't let me
No.
call you during the night, Doctor.
No.
She's really not
Right.
well,
Oh, that's
flushed
fine.
and hot
Right.
and restless.
What time are you getting those sheep down in the morning, Bill?
Nice speaking to Mr. Crystal, please. Morning. That's the post square, Bob. Extension. I'd like to take some of the ladies not in. When you try
The telephone has become so much a part of our modern way of life as to be considered a necessity. There is practically no limit to the places it will reach or the services it will render. And there are times when the telephone is the only means of getting help and rescue. Yet, simple as the telephone is to operate, the making of a call is a very complicated business. Could we but ride an automatic call to its destination, this is what would seem to happen. Now, let's examine this more carefully. A telephone is connected to the outside world by 2 wires. These pairs meet at pole boxes, where they become part of the main cable feeding that area. Main cables are generally run underground. They are the lifelines of the telephone, and everywhere men are busy extending these lifelines in a constant battle to get the telephones in. And as cables do not come in endless lengths, they have to be joined. This is a skilled job where it would not do to be colorblind, as each pair of wires is identified by color. Trenching, the laying of ducts, and the laying of cables are all costly undertakings, especially with materials at their present-day levels. For the purpose of repair and inspection of cables, manholes are installed at intervals, and it's here that junctions are made into main cables heading to the exchange. At the exchange itself, the cables emerge from underground. By this time, they've grown to the point where they carry as many as 1,800 pairs, and the connecting of these to the exchange mechanism is a job that can only be done by the most highly trained staff. When you lift your receiver, there follows a pause before the dialing tone is heard. In that time, certain things happen at the exchange. Lifting the receiver operates a relay, which operates line finders, which pick up your calling line. When the line finders have located your calling line, group selectors start hunting for an idle register. This ensures a line is available when you dial your number. Only then do you get a dialing tone, which is given out by a small motor and is the same as an operator saying, "Number, please." When a number is dialed, it is the register which records the number and controls the setting up of the call through a series of selectors. the operation being complete when the answering subscriber's telephone rings. This process requires a great deal of equipment. All this equipment costs money. It has to be imported, and it has to be installed. This is a major operation requiring trained men and a good deal of time. Also, new and modern exchanges have to be built to house this equipment. And the more equipment is needed, the more exchanges have to be built. And these have to be designed to cope with the probability of increase in future requirements. And exchange equipment cannot run on its own. As new exchanges come in, skilled people have to be used to keep them running. If a fault is reported by a subscriber, the wire chief must have other men ready to track down and repair the trouble. All this is quite apart from the people needed for actual installation. Now, this laying on of telephones is not just a battle on one front. The need is not limited to cities and towns. Ours is, first and foremost, a farming country, with settlers widely scattered and often far from the nearest township. And, yes, what is it?
Sorry, but that Mrs. Smith down the road was on the line, and can that woman talk? Yes. Now, where were we? Oh, yes, telephones. Now, it's all very well for you city people to want telephones so that you can talk across the street. But what about us farmers out back? What about jacking up a better service for us too? We've pretty well had to take care of ourselves so far. Why, I can remember the day when we had to lay our own wires if we wanted any service at all. Mind you, it wasn't all it could be, but...
Yes, we can all remember when. For much of the rural telephone service in New Zealand grew out of a need. The need was such that many farmers created their own private party lines into a common area exchange, which was usually in a farmhouse. From this, they ran a main line into the nearest departmental exchange. I don't know why I'm using the past tense here, because there are still a great many of these lines doing a good job of work. In fact, when our friend manages to get through again, I mustn't forget to remind him of what's going on right now in places like Koitarangi, near Hokitika. It's all in accordance with the pioneer pattern that has opened up this country in less than 100 years. To overcome the shortage of manpower, farmers in some parts of the Dominion are banding together to supply themselves with the latest in rural telephone service. With the help and advice of post office staff, they're erecting poles, stretching wires, and helping to install rural automatic exchanges of the kind that are springing up all over the country. A small hut that could easily be mistaken for a tool shed contains all the equipment needed to supply a rural district with automatic telephone service of the kind most likely to be useful to the farmer. It reduces the number of subscribers on party lines, and being automatic, the phone goes on ringing until a body has a chance to answer it. In recent months, many new exchanges have gone into operation. Concrete result of the endless effort expended, the time-saving devices adopted, the planning, building, installing, research, training, constructing, and all the services needed for people wanting telephones. Since 1950, more than 75,000 people have acquired telephones. All the resources of a huge organization are being used, and the post office staff have reason to feel that at last they're getting somewhere. But there's no getting away from it. It takes time to overtake a constantly mounting demand, not just in one place, but in all the cities, the towns, and rural areas of New Zealand. It takes time to transfer names from the waiting list to the phone book. It all takes time, and none of it is being wasted, although you wouldn't think so to hear some people talk.
Good morning, madam. Can I help you?
Oh, yes. I'm Mrs. Jones. I'm in the phone book.
I just came round to let you know that we're moving into our new house, and I want our telephone connected up there.
Well, it depends on whether there is a spare connection in your area. If you could give me your telephone.
I thought you'd say that, so I brought it along with me to save time. That's the trouble with you people. You always take so much time.
See what I mean? We have problems.
And thanks to the New Zealand Film Unit and Archives New Zealand. And now Australia.
Edward John Eyre had a vision. He dreamed there was a way over the barrier of wind-sculpted sandhills, along cliffs dropping sheer to the desolate waves of the Southern Ocean, surging into the great Australian Bight to beat on one of Earth's loneliest shores. Through more than 2,000 kilometers of salt pan and blue bush and stunted scrub, Eyre dreamed and endured, and over a century and a quarter ago, found a way.
This is on the construction of the microwave relay from Adelaide to Perth.
Now pierces the barrier of this harsh land, the only direct road link between eastern Australia and the west. It cuts a lonely path through dust and scrub and saltbush, and for 650 kilometres skirts the southern fringe of the great treeless plain, the Nullarbor. 130 kilometres north, one of the great modern trains of the world, the Indian Pacific, cuts across the desert as it spans the continent from Perth to Sydney. The Aborigines have a word for the people who live in this lonely region: longa kalonga, far away from each other. They may come from the isolated settlements and sheep stations into the scattered townships, but there is still the deep sense of remoteness from the rest of the world. In inhospitable land where explorer Eyre reported in 1841 there was not one single watercourse in 1,400 miles. Precious rain feeds no streams, but lies wastefully before seeping back into the thirsty earth. A harsh land that has broken the hearts of many a pioneer. Even today, it needs a stout heart to wrest a living from this dry country, where it may take as much as 25 hectares to support one sheep. Contact with the outside world is rare enough for it to become a family affair to collect the mail from a passing truck. The first bid to end the isolation came in 1877, 5 years after the rest of Australia had established telegraph links with the outside world. It was then that the single iron wire was strung along the path that Eyre had trod to the west. Through these stations, where telegraph crews and their families lived in landscapes as remote as the moon, the incessant chatter of Morse code carried through the desert for 50 years, a tenuous link between Perth and capitals in the east. 1927, the new telegraph. 3 lines opened along the Transcontinental Railway. 1930, the first telephone circuit, voices, east and west. The circuits multiplied, but the demand for communications grew faster. There were delays in traffic. Something new was needed. And in 1968, something new appeared. The technological age came to the desert. The lofty towers of microwave radio began to march with giant strides across the formidable land, finally to break the communications barrier. "60 towers, up to 40 kilometers apart, have bridged the desert gap between Port Pirie and Northam. They complete the nationwide broadband network of coaxial cable and microwave systems, bringing subscriber trunk dialing, television relays, and telegraph and computer data traffic to people as far apart as Carnarvon and Cairns. In the microwave system, unlike ordinary radio, there must be direct line-of-sight contact from antenna to antenna to channel the silent stream of signals flowing through the air. Towers must be set zigzag so that signals cannot overshoot and cause interference to other stations further down the line. The stream of telecommunications traffic picked up by the antenna is reflected into a feed unit and channeled down the waveguide into the electronic heart of the repeater station. Here, complex equipment amplifies the messages and feeds the signals out to be beamed with new strength to the next tower. Traffic can be handled both ways simultaneously. At any moment, each antenna may be both transmitting and receiving many hundreds of voices, signals, and images, each message kept distinct, sharp, and clear. In harsh terrain, virtually unchanged for centuries, a silent reminder of the past marks the way men had to go in their search for the best path for the microwave link to follow. Telecommunications linemen and technicians moved in, and rugged pioneering work became the prelude to the operation of electronic test equipment in these desert areas. Microwave signals can behave erratically in the fluctuating and shimmering atmosphere of the Nullarbor, and a long series of radio propagation tests were automatically recorded, then checked and analyzed to help choose the most suitable radio path. Meanwhile, the new explorers of the technological age, men from the Department of the Interior, went into the wilderness to carry out a survey over the proposed route. The ground parties, working painstakingly through the most difficult country, made pinpoint chartings in the remote areas, the first such surveys ever made. As each section of the groundwork was completed, a survey aircraft took off from a desert strip. Guided by smoke pot markers, in a few minutes, it swept along the path that ground parties had labored over for weeks and charted it from the air in a series of stereo photographs. The portrait of an unlovely land, warts and all. Together with the ground surveys, this produced the first fully detailed contour maps, a vital factor in deciding just which way the microwave towers would stride through the arid barrier to the west. With the course charted, the construction crews moved in with their heavy equipment, and thousands of tons of steel and cement were freighted into the desert. Techniques new to Australia were used on the foundations. They gave great strength together with economy of materials, particularly cutting down the use of concrete, difficult to prepare in this waterless land. A 23-centimetre drill biting down some 10 metres into the limestone gouged a shaft for the taproot that would anchor the steel mass firmly to the earth. A bound sheaf of high-tensile steel cable is the core of strength in the foundation of stressed concrete built up in the shaft. Partly cemented, the cables were, twice within a week, brought under stress with the aid of a compressed air jack, checked that they were held firmly in the ground, then locked at this tension in a seal of concrete. When completed, only the immensely strong stub and anchor bolts remain above the ground. With the foundation bedded deep into the earth, the squat base legs were swung into position. There may be up to 60 tons of steel in the framework of a completed tower, which must be capable of withstanding winds of up to 160 kilometers per hour. With the stocky legs emplaced, diagonal and horizontal bracing framework could be swung into position. This is a job for experts, and these men brought to it the skill of steeplejacks or circus performers. Following a smoothly established plan, these teams took between 2 and 4 days on each site to assemble the long line of towers across the Nullarbor. But to supply and maintain the teams in the field, to move the fleet of heavy vehicles, cranes and equipment, and to transport the huge weight of steel along the construction line over the desert was a major exercise in logistics.
This is VK3AML with the regular Saturday night test transmission video on, if you Google the phrase VK3AML 10 September 2022, that's Google VK3AML 10 September 2022, you'll find the video live stream on YouTube that goes with this audio. I'll be opening up for QSOs on 2 metres in approximately 12 minutes time. That is about 8 or 9 minutes past 11 local time. And then after that, with a lot of people being away at Shepparton at the Hamfest, I'm expecting that we'll have to open up on Zoom and see who's further afield. VK3AML, back to the documentary on the building of the microwave link across the Nullarbor. Incidentally, this was filmed between 1968 and 1970.
The 59 towers ranged in height from 23 to 76 metres. The giant crane could lift pieces of the frame up to the 45-metre level, but beyond that a jury rig was used to hoist up the galvanised steel to complete the loftier sections. And so the towers rose in the desert, the link passing through this Aboriginal reserve in South Australia. And the children who get their schooling at the mission heard a basic lecture on microwave to explain what they saw happening in their land. Telecommunications, along with traditional handicrafts. In this harsh climate, special buildings are needed to house the heart of the system, the repeater equipment that amplifies and maintains the strength of the signals flowing between the antennas. Each dust-sealed shelter to house the delicate equipment was delivered as a complete unit. Around this was assembled a prefabricated, insulated building acting as a sun shield and designed to utilize a natural airflow, entirely supplanting air conditioning, which would have been too costly. Maximum protection is essential in a region which may vary from 50 degrees Celsius by day to a freezing -4 degrees at night. Meanwhile, factories in many parts of Australia were in production with various items and installations essential to the project. Heavy diesel generators and intricate control units for the power supply were manufactured in Melbourne. The use of printed circuit boards and sub-assemblies combined simplicity and efficiency in contributing towards the vital power requirements of the completed system. With no mains power across the Nullarbor, each station must be self-sufficient and produce its own power. Banks of batteries provide a direct current source from which the repeater equipment is fed. These are charged by a dual system with the flashing 4-metre blades of a wind generator providing a backup to the sturdy diesel units. The solid parabolic antennas, the largest ever manufactured in Australia, again called for new techniques to be used in spinning the aluminium sheets. The inner surface of the bowl has to be spun precisely, with only a 3mm variation allowed from its specified shape. Then a framework is fitted on the back to keep the dish rigid and to provide a base for fastening it to the tower. At the telecommunications laboratories, prototype equipment from Britain underwent stringent tests in artificially created extremes of climate to ensure that it would perform well in the Australian environment. All this equipment is fully transistorized using solid-state devices. This modern technique conserves space as well as meeting the requirements of low power consumption and has contributed enormously to the revolution in telecommunications. With new equipment coming in, special classes had to be held to train technical staff at all levels. Engineers from the company supplying the equipment conducted courses to familiarize telecommunications technicians with all the theoretical and operational aspects of the microwave system. On the site, new knowledge and apparatus were used in the final adjustment to the antennas before they went aloft. As part of the test, a photographic record was made of each antenna's performance to be used for any necessary readjustment in the future. Steadied by ropes, the big dish was slowly winched skywards, and while a constant check was maintained from the ground, it was swung in to be fastened to its lofty tower. Each antenna must be carefully aligned to aim accurately at the one on the next tower. Portable equipment is used to send a test beam between the two antennas, which on the Nullarbor are up to 40 kilometers apart. Manipulation brings the big dish into alignment. The final adjustment is made, and when the meter shows maximum signal, the antenna is locked into position. This is the artery of the microwave system, the hollow corrugated copper tube, the waveguide. It must be handled with great care, for it carries the two-way stream of traffic simultaneously received and transmitted by the repeater station. The tower end of the waveguide is locked into its collar on the side of the antenna, and a final tuning matches the performance of the waveguide to the complete network. In the multiple hearts of the system inside the repeater stations, the installation of microwave radio equipment was rapid. Much of it is in fully assembled units which plug straight into prepared racks, greatly simplifying maintenance. Many safeguards are built in to ensure continuity of transmission. If there's a fault or breakdown, the equipment automatically switches to another circuit in a fraction of a second, so quickly that there's no noticeable break in traffic. Many of the lessons learned in building this system have made significant contributions to the development of microwave networks in other parts of the world. In stations such as Seduna and Norseman, monitor equipment keeps an electronic eye on all other stations in the chain. You can see at a glance the state of electrical charge in the batteries hundreds of kilometers away, when the generators are operating, the level of diesel fuel, whether the services of a technician are needed, and even his arrival at a distant station is signaled back. So, in station after station, the final checks are made on the complex equipment, and the way is opened. The signals began to flow between the lofty towers, which brought the great cyclops eyes of their antennas to bear across the shimmering plain. The east-west barrier was finally broken by this highway of telecommunication across the desert from Perth to Adelaide. The land returns to its ancient seclusion, but across it now streams a great silent flood. Telephone calls, telegraph and telex messages, computer data, radio and television relays, giving the West full and direct communication with the East. And through Earth stations such as that at Seduna, satellite contact with the rest of the world. The Nullarbor link can handle more than 1 million phone calls a year. It constitutes a major section of the national broadband network and means that people can pick up a phone and dial direct to most other places in Australia. The benefits of one of the most modern communication systems in the world have been brought to communities throughout the land, to the once isolated station owner on the Nullarbor, to the desert city of Kalgoorlie with its Golden Mile, to vast industrial enterprises such as BHP at Whyalla, to mineral boom towns of the west such as Kambalda, and to remote townships scattered over vast distances of the continent.
Hi, Joe. You know that stock we're talking about? Well, look, Joe, these stock are really hungry. I want to truck down 500 head for adjustment.
Mr. Rayner, would you buy me 10,000 Miniwa minerals? Yes, that's right, with options.
Well, I
No more
don't
than-
follow the recipe exactly. I dropped the garlic and...
It's a boy! 9.5 pounds. Everyone's fine. Except me.
Catch that 9:30 plane. You can be here before lunch. It's a vital meeting, and I'll have
Oh,
the car
that's
meet
you, Mum? We've arrived home safely. A wonderful trip down the coast. And
Darling, I'm sorry
Live
it's raining, Beth.
QSOs
Weather's
in 1
beautiful
minute.
here in Perth. Incidentally, will you marry me?
This is the national network, ABC Television in Sydney, relaying to Brisbane, Melbourne, Hobart.
Edward John Eyre had a vision. More than a century ago, he saw a way clear across Australia. Now it is a reality, although in a way he could never have foreseen. The way is open east to west, but young people to come will have new visions and meet new challenges. And in the world of communications, of developing electronics, satellites and laser beams, the challenges may be met and the visions realized in a way we cannot now imagine.
Ah, yes, the good old days when Telecom Australia had their own film unit. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, transmitting on 147.475 megahertz, and if you're hearing me anywhere else than that, somebody is relaying without authorisation. Just a few items before I open it up for a QSO on 147.475. Every year I get a renewal of my apparatus licence. I'm holding it up to the webcam at the moment. This is my renewal for this year. And for the last 10 years, and this is a bit of a laugh, in the same mail, more often than not, as I get the renewal, I get the cancellation of licence you've paid too late. We never have. And I always check on the ACMA database. I am there continuously. There is no cancellation of licence. But for the last 10 years, every time we get one envelope with renewal of apparatus licence and one with cancellation, and I guess that means it's all handled by computer, and the computer has a glitch somewhere in the program. So try to make of that what you will. Anyway, with that, a lot of locals, I know that Peter VK3ACZ, for example, is up at the Shepparton Hamfest, or at Shepparton preparing for the Hamfest, which starts tomorrow morning. The Northeast Radio Club, Shepparton Radio Club. And consequently, people that are really keen about Hamfests will have depopulated Melbourne. Scarborough, Dunnabunk, gone. so I don't know how many people will come back to this. But this is VK3AML now opening it up for a QSO on 147.475 and standing by for any calls.
VK3 Golf Lima Charlie.
Well, we have Gary, VK3GLC. G'day, I've noticed your comments on the Facebook page. Glad to see that we think on the same page, basically, literally. And how are things with you, Gary? You've obviously not gone to Shepparton. I'll take a standby for any other calls, and then if nobody else comes back, if you take it, Gary, VK3GLC, with a pause for any other calls, VK3AML.
Yeah, nothing heard of this location, Chris, so I guess I'm it, am I?
Looks like it.
Cool. Good evening, Chris. Thanks for the broadcast. VK3 Golf Lima Charlie. And content all very relevant, especially as it's sort of spanned 30 years of my career, as mentioned previously. And yes, I was involved in the East-West microwave link also, from, well, two perspectives. Radio route control at Mount Bonython in South Australia, which was looking after the East-West network right through from Ceduna to where it disappeared over the Victorian border on this side at Border Town, and also as a part of radio route maintenance, going out to sites and running routines and fixing the varied equipment on that. I did that for a short while before getting back into general stuff, exchange maintenance, etc. Customer equipment, line faults, you name it. And then I suppose moving over to Melbourne in 2000 to take up a position managing the national ADSL network and legacy pair gain stuff up until my demise. Mind you, I have been back a few times whenever they get into trouble. Phone rings and it's a case of, okay, what do you want me to do and how much are you going to pay me? So I much prefer it that way. But it's some very interesting stuff, and it's amazing how different the American terminology is to what we use in Australia and New Zealand, as opposed to the way they do things. It's, the principles are the same, but they use different manufacturers and call things by different terminology, so it just sort of makes it a little more exciting. VK3AML, VK3GLC.
We've got a blank carrier there, not all that strong. Would the person care to chip in with something, or are you just dropping the carrier to see if you get through? VK3AML, standing by. No interest in joining us, apparently. Oh, well, that's a pity. Yeah, it was interesting while we were seeing that New Zealand picture. Rolly from Auckland was texting that he was recognising some what he called rotary switching gear, and the type of uniselector that they had in New Zealand is one that I've never seen before. I mean, I only know this stuff from the uniselectors you see wrenched out of service and somehow making their way to hamfests or in junk sales. And I have never seen the rotary type that was in that New Zealand film. Perhaps you might have, Gary. And I'm curious with the east-west system, that Nullarbor Plain thing, the microwave relay, as they all had wind generators, I would have expected the wind generators to be a major source of problem, being mechanical devices, particularly if they froze up with dust aggregation and could not feather in a high wind. They'd be fairly dangerous, I would imagine. And I think there was an Adelaide-based wind generator firm called Dunlight years ago. I don't know whether they still exist, but I know that the post office used quite a few of their products. They had big galvanised iron blades, I think 3 per generator, very heavy, and if they shed a blade, you'd know all about it. The blades would go half a mile, a kilometre easily, whizzing through the air and then embedding themselves in the ground quite spectacularly. I heard of one particularly spectacular disintegration on the Bass Strait Islands. I think it was on Three Hummock Island. They had a Dunlight wind generator that shed one of its, or it could have been King Island, I'm not sure which, but it was out in Bass Strait, which gets pretty heavy winds. It shed one of its blades, and then the vibration of the remaining rotating material was sufficient to tear the supporting tower apart. So quite a spectacular sign of devastation that the engineers found when they got out there. VK3 GLC, VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, with a pause for any breakers.
Yeah, okay, Chris, nothing heard. Yeah, the Dunlight generators were quite popular in the early years. I didn't have anything to do with them. Most of them had disappeared by the time that I'd entered the scene, which would have been sort of early 80s, and they were in use across the network, but. Yeah, I think the very things that you mentioned weren't a particularly reliable type device. I think they're only there as a backup just in case the generator had issues. But in the later years, second generators were installed at some of the more critical sites with an automatic changeover every so often to cycle them. And generators were becoming more efficient anyway, so the biggest problem with the generators used to be the refuelling thereof. Quite an expensive process, as you would imagine, having to cart fuel out along the Nullarbor and dumping at the various sites and get the schedule right, and because certain times of the year made access a little bit interesting for some of these sites, but yeah, certainly good times. But yeah, the wind generators were certainly out of fashion by the time that I came along. I know that even some of the small rural exchanges, there was provision on the discharge panel for a generator input, and if you sort of went back through all the station blueprints and paperwork, they were accounted for in the electrical diagram, but I only ever think I came across one discarded tower at a site for a wind generator, but other than that, not used anymore. As you say, they're a pretty unwieldy, dangerous sort of thing. Yeah, notice in the New Zealand film, yeah, some of the gear was a little bit different. The uni selectors were somewhat different to what we use here. The standard design was at least in Australia, was sort of born out of the British Post Office design, and we first off had the APO uni selectors, which were a sort of a single step type job, which most people will probably be familiar with, and then later on what we used to call a motor uni, which was where the wipers were driven around by an electric motor rather than a pawl and ratchet system, and the vertical either group selectors or final selectors, where you step up and step across to get your final outlet. I've worked on those before. And later on, crossbar, we over here use the LM Ericsson stuff from Sweden and completely redesigned it to suit local conditions, whereas the Americans were using either General Electric or AT&T stuff, which was although similar in principle but slightly different in design. VK3AML, VK3GLC.
Do we have any other breakers, VK3AML? No, just an occasional weak carrier in between me and you. I don't know what that signifies. VK3GLC, VK3AML. Interesting that I happened to pick a film that was of a system you actually worked on. I had a feeling that if I got some local material from the Post Office Film Unit, which became Telstra Film Unit before its eventual demise, I think about 1980, that somebody locally would have recognised some of the equipment. Unfortunately, very little of the Post Office Film Unit's output has reached the internet. I don't think NFSA, National Film and Sound Archive, has put any up, and a few bits and pieces have come up from collectors who have their own 16mm prints in variable condition and have just squirted the print up on the wall with a projector and then wired a video camera in. And I think that's the way that one that I got was done, a little bit fuzzy in the original. I tried to sharpen it, to crispen it, but there's only so much you can do before you run out of definition. But I look forward to other Post Office productions coming up. Each of the services, it tended to be that the Army had its own little film unit, Air Force certainly did, Post Office, Shell Oil, a large petrochemical company, had its own film library and film production unit. There were quite a few in this country. The national film producer was Film Australia, formerly known as the Commonwealth Film Unit, and before that, during the war and shortly after, as the Department of Information Film Unit. Before the war, it existed as a very small department in Melbourne called the Cinema Branch of the Department of Commerce, and usually had commentary by Norman Banks, who the older people tuned in tonight will recognise the name of, a very prominent Melbourne broadcaster up to the time of his death in the mid-70s. But was on those early Commonwealth documentaries back to the early 30s, along with a few others who I can think of. It'll be interesting if later on, when we open up Zoom, maybe about 15 minutes' time, if Rolly's still about to make comment on the New Zealand material. That particular doco from New Zealand Film Archives I thought was particularly excellent in the technical sense. Something I've noticed about New Zealand is culturally, technically, they punch well above their weight. I mean, they've got a population of around a tenth of what Australia has, and with that small number of people, frankly, they get a lot of things done better than we do, including their film industry. So a compliment to your countrymen, Rolly, if you're watching at the moment. You might like to tell us a little of the equipment in the East-West link system. Was it significantly upgraded with the years? I imagine they would have moved to higher and higher frequencies to get larger bandwidth as time went on, and I would imagine that now it's likely that those microwave links would be replaced by a trencher going the full width of Australia and laying down fibre optic cables. VK3GLC and, well, not AND Group, VK3GLC, VK3AML. I think all our regulars are up in Shepparton.
Yeah, okay, Chris. Yeah, the group, well, us and the carrier dropper. Probably someone I've upset over the years.
Or me.
Through a thing or another, but should be sufficient signal to get into your system without too much drama. Yeah, the initial, I can't remember what was in the system initially, but I know the popular thing was manufactured by GEC, or at least on the systems out towards Bordertown from Mount Bonython. Flavour around about 2 gigahertz to 4 gigahertz, those sort of things. And later in the piece is replaced by some NEC stuff that was either 4 or 6 gigahertz, and a slightly higher capacity, and the add drop elements for various places, like for example the add drop out to Satellite Earth Station around Ceduna. Made it a little bit easier to handle those sort of things. There are a couple of other sites that had add drop units put in there for some local exchanges also. I'm not sure what was put in later years, sort of after I left the radio area, but I think the new system, I'm not sure how far it went, but you're looking at 11 and 12 gigahertz equipment from Teletra, Italian stuff. I remember bumping into a few Italian engineers at one of the sites just out north of Adelaide. They were sort of explaining, as they do, lots of hand waving, how the whole thing went together. So there was a bit of a mishmash of stuff, but you were right. Eventually the whole east-west microwave system was made redundant by optical fibre, and I don't think any of the radio gear is still working, even in a backup capacity. I think it's still installed, but all turned off, because the optical fibre system is the one that's doing all the work now, and with the other carriers as well putting their own networks in as well. In addition to that, we've got optical fibre running everywhere. The latest advances of that using DWDM, or distributed wave division multiplexing, where you stick up to 10 light sources down the same fibre, each with a different wavelength, and multiplexing and demultiplexing through interesting devices. There's a hell of a lot more capacity than you'd ever get on a microwave radio system, so it's all new and exciting. VK3AML, VK3GLC.
VK3GLC, VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, and there are about how many? 24 people watching on the live stream. It's amazing. I don't know why, particularly tonight, we've got such a large live audience. Usually it's about 12 to 15. Must be something about the weather or whatnot. And I'll comment on some of the things that I'm seeing up there. Rolly in Auckland says the uni-selectors you would have seen, Chris, would have come from a step-by-step exchange, the next generation on from the rotary system. Well, that's the rotary system we saw in that New Zealand doco. An NPI test comments, very good proactive network maintenance existed in those days. I think now that a lot of services have gone commercial, it's maintenance in response to failure, and that can build up. It's like the SEC being sold off to private industry. I really wonder with maintenance only being done on demand rather than pieces of equipment being replaced at regular intervals when the whole system might have a catastrophic failure. An NPI test continues. Nowadays, the network could be said to be very neglected. There are people that I used to work with that are actively collecting examples of such neglect and are waiting for the next major catastrophic outage as a reason to release it in the public interest. That is, do some research on, for example, the Warrnambool Exchange fire and the reason for it happening. So there's quite a bit of discussion going on. NPI Tests ironically says now the main Telstra research facility is located in Bangalore in India. Well, it certainly has moved a long way from Clayton, hasn't it? If that's a serious comment, and I'm not quite sure that it is. Need meeting ID and joining code for the Zoom meeting. Okay, Rolly, well, I'll get it up and running soon. I'm actually thinking, and I'll canvass this idea for people to comment on in text or in Zoom later. Would you like me to start a half hour earlier at 9 p.m. Melbourne time so that you can get the start of this in Auckland, for example, at 11 p.m. rather than midnight or 11:30? And then to do the Zoom first rather than last. That might be a logical solving to Rolly and other New Zealand viewers' insomnia problems that I appear to be creating. Kez's Nerf War says, "Hi Chris, on my son's log-on tonight. Good audience tonight, listening to you on one computer and tributes in the House of Lords to QE2 on the other." And that's Dennis VK1DKO, who was on Zoom last week. Good day, Dennis. I think we all agree that Queen Elizabeth dealt with a very hard job with great dignity and rarely made huge gaffes. Let us hope that the incumbent makes as few gaffes, but considering the things that have happened in his non-official capacities in the last 30 years, I really wonder. Somehow the term King Charles III and the consort, the royal consort, doesn't roll off the tongue very well. I wonder how long it'll be before he abrogates to his sons. It'll be an interesting question. Just checking back through the comments. Dave Ranson, good evening. Back on board, but a mixture of jet lag and on-call last night means I'll be listening only. Well, thanks for that, Dennis. I know you've spent some time in Britain. I think we had you there on Zoom for the first attempt. ZL1BQD, my first attempts at radio teletype on the ham bands was with a Creed teletype machine. I hope you had headphones on, Rolly. Those things can put up a hell of a racket. It's a bit like those old dot matrix printers that had to be put in soundproof enclosures to stop secretaries and office staff going deaf. Looking through the other comments there, the most common problem was forcing the dial back with your finger instead of letting it return under its own speed. Yes, the regulator on the dial returns probably was subject to some difference in speed, which could have buggered up the sequence of switching at the exchange. Who knows? And as for the British Post Office designs, Gary, I know that quite a few of the early Postmaster Generals of Australia, H.P. Brown particularly in the 1920s and 30s, was British to the very core and made sure that virtually everything that we did with the ABC transmitters and with the telephone network was based on good conservative British principles. So we got a lot of equipment pre-war that was built like a battleship, and more by weight than by efficiency got by. VK3GLC to comment, VK3AML, and thanks for the rundown on the steadily increasing microwave frequencies up to 12 gigahertz. VK3GLC, VK3AML, with a pause if anyone wants to break in.
Apparently not. VK3GLC. Thanks, Chris. Yes, I agree with NPI tests. Testament to the state of the network, and it's certainly not getting any better. I'm not sure whether the research facility is in Mumbai, Pune, or anywhere else over there. I think it might be spread between the lot of them, and you sort of shake your head, but it's the way of the world, apparently. He mentions Warrnambool, sort of basically across that one at the time, and the ensuing debacle and getting the thing back up and running again. And I do remember one in one of the New South Wales suburbs that suffered a similar fate. I can't remember the particular suburb now, but what made it more exciting was the fact that it was a fairly large junction point for a lot of optical fibre cables running around Sydney, and what started out as a small fire destroyed a lot of stuff and caused a lot of headaches for a lot of people, and took some considerable time, effort and money to get it back up and running again. So I'd have to agree with that. And yes, I did spend some time with NPI Test in Clayton in the early days. But, certainly a lot of good technology gone through the system. Surprising how much of the legacy stuff is still hanging around in the network. Some stuff that they said would have been out of the network 20 years ago, well, it's still there and it's still working, and there's still live customers hanging off of it, so that sort of makes it somewhat interesting. But it certainly kept me busy for quite some number of years, and in the ensuing years as a, shall we say, consultant type capacity, which is somewhat different. And the early PMG Telecom era run very, very close to the ABC also, so I'm familiar with what went on with the ABC in the early days. VK3AML, VK3GLC.
VK3GLC, VK3AML. Would you care to tell us exactly what happened from your point of view with the Warrnambool fire, or are you free to talk about it? It's the first I've heard of it, but obviously it was something catastrophic if people on the text chat mention it, and you've mentioned it. So, any details? The Warrnambool exchange fire?
Well, I may be getting a little bit confused with a few other ones, but I think the basic context was lack of maintenance on the, I can't remember whether it was the power plant or the air conditioning, but I know it was one of them, and then the lack of maintenance caused some particular fault to occur, which caused something to be set on fire, and due to the fact that the fire prevention system wasn't maintained properly, you can imagine what happened after that. Go ahead.
I got an attack of the giggles. I probably shouldn't, because it's taxpayers' money going up in flames. The power or the air conditioning went up, which caused other things to go up, and then the fire prevention system hadn't been maintained. Oh my God, What a cock-up. I've heard of some very odd things happening with Telstra, but most of my experience work-wise was contact that I had with the organisation and specifically its museum, which is now the National Telecommunications Museum in Richmond. When I knew them, they had a big storage area down Street, Collingwood. I think all of that's now been amalgamated into the building, the old Hawthorn Exchange in Burwood Road, Hawthorn. I've got an address for that too to read out. If anybody is curious to see where, for example, Mr. J Thomas's telephone from 1877 is now held, it's actually held at the National Telecommunications Museum in Burwood Road, Hawthorn, but I can't find the page that I put the note on, strangely. He said, flicking through page after page, puzzled. No, it's not going to turn up. I'm sure I wrote it in here somewhere. Oh, I'll have to do better with the filing. But Burwood Road, Hawthorn, for those who are interested, apparently a very good display. A lot of important telecommunications equipment. I must give them a ring and take a video camera in and do a bit of a coverage of it for one of these Saturday night sessions. Now, there's a thought. Make a note for future reference. Telecom Museum for Saturday night. Okay. Well, Gary, I'll go over to you for a final, unless anybody else pops up on the radio, and then perhaps we'll go over to Zoom and see if we can fire that up and get the regulation 40 minutes before the bastards who run it pull the plug on it, as they always do. 40 minutes is all you've got. VK3GLC, VK3AML.
VK1 Tango Yokohama, portable VK3 on 147.475.
VK1 TTY acknowledge, VK3AML. Well, a visitor from Canberra. Would you care to take it for an over? VK1 TTY, VK3AML, who's currently live streaming on YouTube and about to, in the next 10 minutes or so, go over to Zoom for an extension of our chat there. VK1 TTY, welcome to Melbourne, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML, VK1 TTY, portable VK3 returning. Just scanning around the band and noticed the signal up here on 147. I thought I'd pop in and say good day. Name here is Tim Tango, India Mike, Tokyo, Italy, Mexico. Visiting from Sale, Sugar, America, Lima, Ecuador, southeastern Victoria there. Anyway, I'm just curious as to what the service is here. I'm assuming it's a simplex service. There, Chris, back to you.
Yeah, I'm continuing a tradition that was started by my predecessor with my call sign when he had crossbands from 160 metres to 2 metres back in the 1970s, and it was continued as a tradition, in inverted commas, by Dave Stewart, VK3 ASC, who's now moved north of Bendigo and is operating shortwave broadcast station, Shortwave Australia, on 2310 and 4835 kilohertz. So that's left the Saturday night slot for discussion groups open. So now, the days being what they are, I no longer do 160 metres. Very few people are equipped for it anymore. More people are equipped for 2 metres these days. And we simultaneously run a YouTube live stream, and we cap off the night with a Zoom meeting, which I also run through the Zoom live stream. If you Google VK3AML 10 September 2022, you'll get the video that goes with this, and that was my stomach rumbling. I obviously have to have a late night snack after this. For the first 90 minutes after 9:30 every Saturday night, we run pre-recorded material. So this week, for example, a lot of films going back to the silent days, documenting the history of telephones and the telephone system from the days of manual exchanges through crossbar and transistorization and finally microwaves. Last week we had films taken in the 1920s, very early sound films of Alexander Graham Bell's assistant Thomas Watson, talking about the mid-1870s when they invented the telephone, 50 years before that film was made. So that's the situation. I'll hand it over to you, Tim, VK1TTY Portable 3. Welcome from Sale in East Gippsland, okay. And then you can hand it round to Gary, VK3 Golf Lima Charlie, who's also on the frequency. VK1TTY, VK3AML and Group.
Yeah, I'll copy there, Chris, VK3AML, VK1TTY, Port 3. I'm just currently portal in Ringwood at the moment, and just using a little flower pot half-wave and a IC705 borrowed here from my good friend VK3 STL Judd up in Ringwood here, just staying for the weekend and enjoying the weather and playing a bit of radio there. All copied, mate. Thank you very much for the information there. It's definitely noticed. I'll jot this down in my notepad, so next time I'm up here in Melbourne, I can join in on the net there, and QSL on the Zoom there. I'll jot that also down in my notepad as well. Thank you very much there, Chris. I'll say 7.3. I'm going to go back to 40 metres and see if I can wrangle up some southeastern Asian DX there. Anyway, I'll hand it over to, missed the name of the other operator there, but pass it over to VK3, Golf Lima Charlie, from Victor Kilo 1, Tango Tango, Yokohama, Port 3 in Ringwood. Have a good night, 73 gents. Bye-bye.
Yeah, 7.3 Tim, and welcome to the system, VK1TTY, VK3GLC. I'm located in Roeville, so good signal from you at this location. Not full bars, but enough bars to make it significant. Good signal here. Okay, yeah, Chris, yeah, I'll make this one my last one. I've just fired up the computer so I can have a quick look and see what the Zoom is doing, if you get it working. And yes, one thing I sort of noted on that East-West system microwave video, they mentioned the remote control and monitoring system. I do remember working on that because they still had that at Benithan when I was up there. The SRC1 supervisory system used to run on a supervisory channel on the microwave gear, and collected all the alarms and performed rudimentary remote controls across the whole system. So that's the sort of thing you were looking at, especially on the midnight to dawn shift, which I did quite a few of, and monitoring all the TV broadcast bearers and all those other exciting things. And I did see NPI Test's comment about Warrnambool up in the thing there, and about his alleged, shall we say, alleged cause. Yeah, I think you were probably right there. That was something weird went on, and it was sort of one of those chain of events that should never have happened, but it did. But I don't know whether they actually learned anything from that. I'm sure we'll never know, and I'm a bit past caring. All right, hand it back to you, Chris. So thanks for your broadcast tonight. As I said, all well received here, and watching it on the telly in the lounge with headphones on, so audio was great. And hopefully we'll catch you next week. Not sure if I'm going to go to Shepparton tomorrow or not. I'll see what happens when I get up. So 7.3 for now, and good evening to all. VK3AML, VK3GLC.
VK3GLC and VK3TTY. Well, I have the Zoom meeting up. If people are watching on 1080p, hang on, I'll just line up the screens a bit better. You should be able to read the codes there. The meeting ID 83829910110. The passcode figure 5 large S small h 90 small c, and the numeric passcode 975110. That's the telephone room system. I don't see anybody there at the moment, but you know, it could change. So this is VK3AML standing by on Zoom, hoping that Zoom is working. I got a warning that the audio might not be working on it, so it'll be interesting to see if we do have any result there. So if anybody cares to come up on Zoom, we're standing by. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. Just turning up our audio. I don't think we're seeing anybody coming through. Again, the passcode 5 capital S for Sammy, H small h 90C, and the numeric passcode 975110. And I don't think we're going to get a nibble this week. Although I am streaming the a picture of the numbers and letters there. I'll just bring it in a bit closer. Chris Long's Zoom meeting. No. No result, and I have no idea why. So would anybody care to join us on Zoom? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. Those of you who are watching the live stream can see the numbers. I'm reading the text. 5. Yeah, thank you, Pirate. We've got Rolly. Hang on. I'll bring Rolly up, and hopefully we'll get some audio. I hope I'm getting audio from you, Rolly. Not sure. Are you hearing me, Rolly? Standing by for ZL1BQD. And Dennis. Do you hear me, Rolly? It looks like we've got no sound. Do you hear me there, Rolly? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just checking my connections here. Can you hear me, Rolly? Has anybody got audio, or have we no audio? You can hear me? Your thumbs up. I can't hear you at the moment. What about Dennis? You got audio, Dennis? I can see you, but I can't hear you. Maybe if I just check here. Video, join audio, test speaker and microphone. Yeah, that can be heard, so I should be on audio. You should be hearing me. Why I can't hear you is... Be heard. Good. Hang on. Audio. You should be hearing me. Yep. Gotcha. Hang on. Gotcha. I'm just adjusting the treble and bass to get it even there. I'm hearing you. I think I'm hearing back through your speaker, Dennis. I think I'm hearing back through your speaker, Dennis. With about a 10-second delay. Can you turn your speaker down a little? Dennis? Unmute us. Oh, hang on. Where are we?
Unmute us. Oh, hang on. Where are we?
Where the hell is that?
Where the hell is that?
Just trying to find. Hello. No, I'm not hearing anything. Logitech OBS virtual camera video settings. Nothing there. I had it a minute ago. I can't see. Where is it? Do I right? Oh, that's asked to unmute. I think you're muted, Rolly. Have we got audio there now? Mute. Asked to unmute. I don't think this... I don't know why, but we've got no audio. Hello. Hello. I think I can be heard, but I can't. Damned if I know what's the... Test speaker and microphone. Join with computer audio. That's better. Sorry about this. And I'm seeing your lips moving and I'm hearing nothing. Now, sorry about this, fellas. Failed to detect your speaker. Please make sure your speaker is properly connected. But it is.
Some hostage video.
That's got it. Sorry about that.
Can you hear us now, Chris?
Yes, I can hear you now fine. How are things in Canberra?
Okay. Pretty good. Pretty cold. I had a few audios on tonight. I was listening to Radio New Zealand, actually. The big thing on the Queen. I was listening to the House of Lords speeches. What a classy, people who can write and speak well. So it's very interesting hearing that. I was listening to Radio New Zealand.
A bit of a difference to ours.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't want to say that. That was the subtext. But it's been pretty good. Here it's quite cold. It's quite mild, actually.
Yes, Canberra. I spent a year in Canberra in 81. And it included a winter. I had to walk. I was staying at the halls of residence at the ANU, and every morning I'd walk across the bridge to the National Library sound recording section where I was working. And by the time I got there, my hands were blue if I didn't have them in a pair of gloves. People wouldn't believe what Australia's national capital is like in winter. Summer it's fine. Winter is dreadful.
No, winter's very cold. I lived in Wellington for 3 years, and Canberra's much colder than Wellington.
Yeah, just the wind in Wellington, isn't it, Rolly?
Yes, wind is fairly notorious in Wellington, but it can get bitterly cold there too. But no, I've been in Canberra as well, and I agree. I think it's quite a different cold, isn't it? Really, it's one that sort of bites right through anything.
Oh yeah. And
it's a bitter cold.
You recognise some gear from that New Zealand doco, Rolly? The rotary.
Sorry, what was that?
Hello?
What was that again, Chris?
You recognise some of the gear in that New Zealand documentary?
Yes, and the gear that they showed was what they call a rotary exchange. And a rotary exchange has one ginormous constant speed motor at floor level, which drives a shaft horizontally.
Oh, okay.
And then from that horizontal shaft, there are a whole lot of vertical shafts.
Right.
Which in turn drive further horizontal shafts for the individual switches. But these big vertical shafts, which would, for each of the bays, could be put in and out of gear by grabbing the shaft while it's still rotating. You could grab the shaft and lift it.
Yep.
And that would disengage it from the main motor down at the bottom, which just kept on grinding away. But of course, we were required to wear dust coats in those days. And so if you weren't very careful, you could round the corner of a rack and your dust coat would flick into the shaft like that. The gear would grab your dust coat and just pull it into the gear, and you're going backwards like this, hastily trying to either get around to lift the shaft out and disengage the gear, or get your dust coat off in a hurry. So
sounds like a system that has a lot of possibility for disaster to me. Just the number of mechanical things.
Yes, now those unit selectors were constant drive, so they kept going all the time, and those are the unit selectors that you saw in that system. The unit selector that you're talking about, I think, was a sort of a half U type thing where the wipers would go around like that. That was in a step-by-step exchange, so that's the next generation on from the rotary exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to the rotary, either a step-by-step or a rotary exchange could actually be fed by a junction manual exchange, which is the old plug it and the hello girls, as you're saying.
Yeah.
But eventually, all those junction manual exchanges were taken out of service and replaced by step exchanges, or the rotaries. But the step-by-step were the modern equivalent in those days. And then from the step-by-step, it went into the crossbar system. Then from the crossbar system into full electronic ones, where you had your notorious OC71s, which were they were a great source of income. Those OC71s, because as I said in the chat there, if you scrape the paint off the OC71, they became light sensitive.
Oh, yeah. I've had a few OCP 71s that I used early on.
So
modulated light.
So being naughty apprentices and so on like that, and young technicians that had wanted a little bit of cash extra time, you could just get like a little razor blade, scrape a little bit of the paint off one of these OC71s, then go home at the end of the day. And when around about 8 or 9 o'clock, when the lights came on inside the exchange, or mayhem, alarms would go here, there, and everywhere. You run back into the exchange, out with a little bit of fingernail paint over your little scrape, and you get paid time and a half for that one.
Yeah. Tell me, Rolly, I've been to Motat at Auckland and very impressed with the displays there. Are there any other radio museums in that region of New Zealand that you're aware of?
No, Motat would be the one to go to, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, VK7... I've blanked on his call. Mike Roth, VK3AML. He's the guy that does all the light beam stuff with me. And I, with a group, went to see Motat about 4 or 5 years ago and came away extremely impressed, including the fact that we saw a Melbourne toast rack tram with a St Kilda destination on it. I thought to myself,
there you go.
If you climb on there, it'd take quite a while to get to St Kilda.
One of my old radios actually ended up in Motat. I gave it to them in full working, and that was an ex-army, what they call the ZC1 ex-army transmitter.
Yeah,
and that would go suitably modified in those days. I had it going on 40 meters and 80 meters, but put that back into the original condition. We're complete with the original 12-volt vibrator to give you the. Oh my word!
I had a friend. I had past tense had a friend who brought a radio for me, a car radio, to fix, and it had come out of his 1941 Buick. And he said, "Can you get this working?" And I, very, great bravado, "Oh yes, I can get anything working." Well, every capacitor, every resistor, all the resistors had gone 400% high. All of the capacitors had turned into resistors. The heat that thing must have been exposed to over time.
The good old wax impregnated paper.
Yeah, the Ducon, Plessy Ducon stuff.
and Morganite resistors that.
I got it working, except you had to bash the radio to get the vibrator to start.
Yeah,
literally
that was common practice. Yes.
Yeah.
Likewise, in those old telephone receiver sets, if everything started going quiet on you, you just got that and gave it a good thump on the desk, And
when the carbon
what
was
you
packing.
did was you unpack all the carbon
G'day, Tom.
granules, and away it went. Perfect sound again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, Tom.
So now we've got Ballarat. We've got Canberra, we've got Auckland. This is becoming multinational.
Yeah, Chris.
Yes.
Chris, now that you've got full screen Zoom on your screen, you can't see what people are asking for you on the chat on YouTube.
I probably could,
we're
but
streaming out for the ID. They're streaming out for the numbers to get on Zoom.
Okay. Pirates put them up.
Well, he's put one up, hasn't he?
5SH9751.
Yeah, but he didn't put the 832991011.
Oh, I have to do that too. Do I have to do all three?
Yeah.
Good heavens. I'm sorry.
No, just those two. Don't worry about the last one, but the 8381 and the 5SH90E. You did it last week for us.
Oh, sorry about that.
So there's guys hanging in there probably want to go.
There you go.
Because
I've just posted it for you, so there you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
I ended up going back through the YouTube and going through it 4 times to get the numbers right.
Yes, and I noticed people are saying that on Need Info Up.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Hang on. Where do we
No
get
problem.
this? Now I've got the wrong... There we go. It's up on the screen, and that'll appear on the YouTube live stream shortly, but it's... meeting ID 838-2991-0110 for those who are interested. And I see Terry's looking in, and he says they're wrong. That's what I'm reading.
Yeah, and I've used that number, and I used the 5 capital S lower H 90 small c, and that worked.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think we're going to have to go to Jitsi with this eventually, because just getting into this is so difficult. And then by that time, you've used up half your 40 minutes. It's just a bit much.
Well, this is only the fourth time. This is only the fourth time, Chris. So sooner or later you'll get it right.
Yeah, I know. It's getting all of this going together has been slightly murderous. I mean, we tried to. I spent a long time trying to get a single Ethernet cable going with a splitter. Never succeeded, so I ended up running a second long cable from one end of the house to the other, second long Ethernet cable, joining directly to the modem. Now, why that should have been different from a splitter, I have no idea, but this works and the splitter didn't. And Dennis, how are things in Canberra? You been up to anything special?
Not too best. Not a great deal, Chris. I've just been I'm changing my kids in their school, so they're probably in a position where we've found a slightly better school for primary school for my kids. So I'm switching the primary kids in their primary school. What else have I been doing? Just working. Going to Sydney. Unlike you guys, I haven't fully retired. But I'll tell you what, I'm hanging out to fully retire, Chris.
Yeah, I can tell you that there's broad sunlit upland, as Winston Churchill used to say, on the other side of retirement. I'm enjoying it right now. But we were very lucky.
Look, most of the guys aren't.
My wife and I did a bit of property speculation right at the end of my career, and that set us up quite well. But it was very lucky, because you can imagine working in the arts as a journalist, and particularly a lot of the work I did was freelance, was not a great way of making huge amounts of money. So we've just been very lucky. And plus I'm lucky enough to know a lot of people who know sources for cheap equipment, which is why I can do this. I wouldn't do anything at retail price, I can tell you.
No, that's good, Chris, because it's and certainly your career, as you sort of said, in the arts is very fickle.
Mm.
You know, it's very fickle. I've got know quite a few people in the arts, particularly in broadcast, and they either scrape a living, do well, not very often, or spend all the rest of their time to scrape a living. It's a very tough.
Well, broadcasting is becoming increasingly tough now, because you can imagine with all the multiple outlets that people have to watch on internet, YouTube, Facebook, apart from broadcast free-to-air, there's cable and 40 channels. It splits the audience so greatly that the advertising revenue really isn't there to support those industries as it used to be.
Well, that's the thing. And also you've got a lot of independent content creators on YouTube, and some of those guys do pretty well.
Hang on, I'm just...
They're setting up...
While you're talking, I'll just retype the passcode. There's one person who hasn't got it. 5, capital S, small h, 90C. Okay,
Yes.
Now Terry, that's the passcode, and see if you can get in.
It's 5 capital S. If you're not reading carefully, it does look like 5.
Yeah.
So you just got to be
What's the meeting
Just one of those.
passcode? I've just typed it, Terry. The meeting passcode. He means the meeting ID, I guess. 838-2991-0110. I'll repeat that. Meeting ID 838-2991-0110. I hope you have that, Terry. Is it a 0 or a letter O? Is what a 0 or letter O?
90.
90. He'll eventually get that. I think he'll pop up. And
5 capital Sierra, lowercase h, 90C Charlie, lowercase.
And thanks for that. And Tom, just with regard to amateurs in Ballarat, the last week or so, on Thursday, we had an EasyPal digital slow scan group on VHF. There was somebody, I think VK3AML in the... Is it IDL? Yep. In the Ballarat area, yes, who was receiving us. And for the first time, we tried the new picture codec. They've improved on JPEG. They have a new codec called the .avif codec. And we put up a couple of pictures in that codec that were so far above anything we've had from EasyPal that I think that'll become standard. Yeah. I mean, instead of being a picture of what, 300 lines definition, we were seeing 1,500 lines.
Yep.
We were getting fantastic results.
Oh, yes, yep.
And that was in picture file sizes of only about 50 to 80K. Really phenomenal stuff.
That's good, because there are a couple of them that are interested in playing with it.
Yeah.
And I think ENAXH has been up. They've been up on 2 metres. FM having a bit of a play.
Yep.
Across town. So there's quite a few getting interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah. Previously, EasyPal has been designed around a thing called the JPEG 2 high compression JPEG format, and that really louses the images up. If you have a field of grass, the blades of grass all become a universal green. It looks like plastic sheet. It really distorts it. AVIF format doesn't work that way at all. How they get a 6-foot device through a 2-foot aperture is I have no idea. It's a bit like real audio.
We had.
Go on.
Yeah, we had a evening dinner night. We have a couple of times a month. Had one last night actually, and a couple of guys there were talking about the higher definition and what can come through. So I wouldn't be surprised a couple of them will be having a bit of a play with it the next 3 or 4 weeks anyway.
Yeah, you can imagine that the compressors for it are hard to find at this stage. So it's
well, what's happening at the moment is there's quite a few looking at building, getting hold of some isolation transformers to help with isolation. Now, I actually happen to have I've got about a dozen transformers that I picked up in a a batch for a job that never got completed.
Yeah.
And I did a quick check on them the other day, and they're actually 800 ohms impedance one end and 1300 ohms impedance the other at 1 kilohertz. So Lachlan AML has taken one of those to have a play and see if they'll work well as an isolation transformer. So whether it's
if you're looking at
the things that happen because the Earth loops,
they'll work well for you, Tom. We use those a lot in broadcasting. Exactly that just in a little package, aren't they?
Yeah.
Little.
Yeah. They've got 6 legs on them.
They'll work exactly. They'll work exactly as you hope for them to work. I'm sure.
Those are the transformers I'm using for coupling. They're X-broadcast, 600 ohm to 600 ohm. But those things are flat from like 10 hertz to about 30k. They're just incredible.
Yeah. Well, what I did was I grabbed them out and measured the resistance of them, and they were down around 30 ohms. So I took it to work and measured the impedance on one of the component testers, and they come up. One end come up with about 420 millihenries, and I'm not sure what the other one was, but I just ran it through the calculator at a kilohertz.
Yeah.
And it came out around, as I said, one I think was around about 800 ohms one end, and the other's about 1,000. I thought, well, that's ballpark figure.
Yeah.
It's not going to hurt anything.
Oh yeah,
certainly get them out of strife.
Yeah, I take some trouble.
I've got about 12 of them here.
Okay. The only thing to watch is if they're the really tiny postage stamp size transformers. At the low end, they tend to phase rotate. And that is okay for audio, but it may not be good enough for a multi-subcarrier digital stream.
Yep. I'm just trying to find the container I had them in because it's only come to hand. I'll see what I can find them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's Rolly, and in where Rolly is, it's now 2:17 a.m. I always feel very guilty putting Rolly through this.
2 secs, but
sorry, Dennis.
If you know anybody in broadcasting, you might be able to get hold of some of those.
Ah, I don't think I've seen those before.
They're a really, really excellent isolation transformer.
They were the things for the so-called B amplifiers in racks, weren't they? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. That's the idea.
And
that's a stereo one. That one. And they work extremely well.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the broadcast standard ones are not as so easy to find.
No.
The little ones, might work, might not, don't know. What you do find is that the people who have the things terminated properly, it's usually not too much trouble. But if it's improperly terminated, it'll do all sorts of funny things to the frequency response.
You must terminate these properly, otherwise they will ring on you.
These have got controlled dynamics written on them, and this one's actually got a part number. I didn't think any of them had, but I might have to go and Google it.
Yeah. Oops, I'm just looking on the text chat. FTJS can't get in, passcode not working. Well, I'll type the passcode for him again. Passcode 5, capital S, small H, 90C. Passcode. And that is the passcode, according to what I can see. Now, just hang on a sec. I might ask while I've got you up there, Rolly, have you been up to anything with construction projects lately?
Construction projects of what sort?
Well, of any sort. Antennas or otherwise?
Well, of late I've been trying. This is from a commercial point of view. been working with a young fellow up in Papua New Guinea, and he's got no qualifications at all. Basically, walks straight out of the bush, but he's got a cell phone with him, and been trying to get a commercial transmitter to work up there with on WhatsApp, and he's going like this with his camera, and I'm going, no, up a bit, down a bit, sideways. Yeah, okay, I'll turn that a little bit. What's got around?
Oh, you're remote control tuning him, for telling him how to tune.
Yeah, well, remote control by telling him what to do, and he's showing me what's going on.
Okay.
Through his phone, and I'm trying to interpret that, and we actually got the 5 kilowatt transmitter up and running again for him, so a commercial transmitter up there.
Okay, is this broadcast
today,
broadcast band?
Yeah,
or?
broadcast FM. Yeah, broadcast FM.
Ah, okay. Are we talking the Highlands, or down Port Moresby? Or?
No, this was actually up northwestern side, up in the Sepik area.
Oh, okay.
East Sepik area.
Right.
In a place called Wewak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark Harrison saying to me on text, that is a 0 in the passcode, very difficult to tell. Is it capital S and capital H? It isn't working.
No. Capital S, lowercase h. It is a 0 and lowercase c.
Yeah, I'm surprised he can't.
He should be able to cut and paste that
yeah,
straight out of the chat.
I thought that. I'm not quite.
I did it last week.
Yeah.
I did it last week. Just cut and paste it.
Yeah, exactly.
The upper and lower case for
send him the Zoom conference number too. You might be having trouble with that. The 838 number 2991
Hang on,
0110. So you might be using the right password into the wrong conference.
Isn't this frustrating? By the time I finish this, the 40 minutes will be up. 838 2991 0110. There. I think that's right. Oh well. And I think most of the people on the Zoom chat, I can see that there's a diminution of the numbers of the viewers on the live stream because most of them are transferred to the Zoom, or they're trying to. Oh dear. So, Tom, have you heard anything about is it IDL? Is he up in a high spot in North Ballarat somewhere? 10 minutes to go.
Last place I knew he was, he was up behind Channel 6, but on the Melbourne side of the hill that the studio sat on.
That's the old Black Hill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he would have been almost at the base of the A&H and George Lance Tower that was up there.
Okay. We've got 10 minutes left, by the way.
He's in a good spot.
Yeah.
He is in actually a good spot if that's where he still is.
I had a friend, Mick McCormack, who used to live up there on that road that ends in the lookout at Black Hill. And he was one of the very few who could get direct television from Melbourne as well as Ballarat.
Yes.
So it was a very good site.
He's on the higher hill. Yeah, he's on the higher hill, and he's on the Melbourne side. So I wouldn't be surprised if he could get into you quite well there.
Yes. He was talking back to us on the net.
AMH, Alpha Mike Hotel. Yeah. Is also having a play with that package.
I just thought that maybe if these guys are sufficiently interested, and if there are enough of them up in Ballarat, that we could probably arrange one of our nets to be on the Mount Buninyong repeater to get into Ballarat if the local runners of that repeater wouldn't mind. We could pick a time when it's not being much used.
That has been a suggestion, Chris.
Oh, good.
It has been a suggestion. And I think we've got a committee meeting Monday night.
Yep.
And I know I've got one other committee member there that's voiced that sort of opinion that it might be a good idea.
Good.
because I know of about at least 4 that are playing with that package at the moment.
Right.
And there's probably another couple of us that would just like to listen in to see what's involved. So,
yeah.
I'll put that down in the notes for the committee meeting, and we'll get back to you. That's
okay,
no problem.
Good stuff. I mean, there are a good dozen of us around Melbourne that regularly use it through RML. And most of us can get through Buninyong like a ton of bricks, particularly those of us high up in the eastern suburbs. Where I am here, it's about 20 over 9. It's incredible. Gets out like a ton of bricks. I can't think of any other repeaters in that area. We actually applied at one stage to have our transmissions through the Mount Macedon repeater, which has terrific coverage, and that was the problem. Amateur Radio Vic thought that it would probably block emergency comms if they had to go through to northern Victoria.
What time of the night or the evening would it be?
Sorry?
Do you know what time of the night or the evening do you have the
anything that you want it to be? As you can see, I'm fairly well a night owl, not quite as much as Rolly, but
well, I can tell you this much: RBA on 2 meters, apart from Peter 3PWG, who comes up just after he comes home from work, and when I get home from work, there's hardly any other traffic on it most of the time.
Yeah.
So getting it to use like that would be a great thing to do. So I'll certainly pop it up to the committee.
Do you get through to Melbourne on any other repeaters, the Geelong one or anything like that?
Me personally, no, because my antenna is a dual band mobile sitting in the window frame of a steel frame house.
Right.
Poking north. So, and the RBA is south.
Right.
And that's about it. I can hear most of them. I can hear RWZ and most of the others.
Yeah.
And get into the locals, but I've got to put something substantial up soon.
Yeah.
Hassle is I live in a rental and it's a brand new house, so we've got to be careful what we do.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I've been in that position in the past. Dennis looks like he's talking, but I think he's talking on some other medium.
He's just reciting poetry, that's all.
Chris, I'm on a call to a mate of mine, Chris, as you guys have been talking.
Yep.
It's been a bit of a busy night having, but I'll mention the comment about broadcast. You're right. It's just such up and down work in terms of how fickle it is.
Yeah.
And you were quite lucky to survive as long as you did.
Right. Sorry, I didn't get most of that.
Still there, Cruz.
It's you're lagging, Dennis. I can't quite.
Oh, I think I've got bandwidth problems, Cruz.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to pedal harder. Pedal harder.
I'll give you a call back in 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay. We'll probably we've got 4.5 minutes left on Zoom. So anything final to say, Rolly, in case we get chopped off?
Oh, I'm fine. It's great to catch up with you again, and we'll do so as we can.
Yeah, Rolly, I hope to get over to shake your hand before too much longer. I want to get back to Motat and have another look at that. I was very impressed with what I saw. There are a few other museums around there too. I didn't see Auckland's main museum when I was over there. I just saw Motat.
If you give me a bit of time, I may well be able to get you into one of the old YA station and have a look at some of the transmitters that we had to actually physically walk into to service.
Now, 2YA at Wellington was 2YA at Wellington was the first New Zealand broadcast station I ever heard when I was DXing as a 10-year-old in 1964 and listening to parliamentary transmissions of Keith Holyoake and all those people way back then. And they had a free channel that nobody else occupied, I think 590 kilohertz or something around there.
Yeah, that's right.
And they were running something like 100 kilowatts. I think that might have been the biggest transmitter of all in New Zealand. And is that still going, or what's happened to that?
No, not now. No.
They've reverted to FM or something.
there's a big push in New Zealand actually to get rid of the AM network, and I'm on the board of a large broadcaster here. In fact, we had a board meeting yesterday, and I'm saying no, we need to retain our AM network.
I would have thought so from the point of view of the mountainous areas of the South Island, particularly. There are some places, some valleys where only AM would get in.
Yes, who knows, in the day to come, we may even go DRM on AM, and if you don't have your frequencies, you're going to be stuffed, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. I know a couple of stations in Utah. I've visited Utah to see some people I knew who were running modulated light, and there was a station there running combination of AM up to 5 kilohertz, and I think from 5 to 10 kilohertz they were running some sort of digital system at the same time.
Yeah, it would be a DRM system of some sort. I mean, you can get on an AM system, you can get a sound quality which will rival CD quality. So it's brilliant.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, 1 minute 50 to go. Anybody have final comments?
I'll just jump in, Chris. A good program tonight. I've now got my audio fixed, so I've had a bit of internet issues. But we'll have look forward to chatting next week. 9 o'clock start next would be really good. I think sure Rolly would agree with that. And Zoom first.
It doesn't really worry me.
Okay, well, look, I'll try running it back to 9 o'clock. The only thing is I worry about, occupying a channel when other people might be trying to use it. There was somebody mobile using 147.475 up to about 9:10. But if I start early and nobody else is there, well, that doesn't matter terribly much. They can find another channel. God knows there are hundreds to choose from. 2 metres is not that narrow and not that often used. Less than 1 minute to go. Okay, thank you very much for coming up, being patient enough to put up with my incompetence on Zoom. And hope to see you next week. Next week I'll be doing the birth of the transistor and the birth of the IC with Bardeen, Brattain and Shockley. I've managed to find films of them and films of the people in Fairchild who developed the IC in the late 60s. So that, I think, will be of interest to people. I'll try to make one subject a week. And the week after, my friend Mike, 7MJ, is coming over from Tasmania. And he's a doctorate in radio astronomy, University of Otago, as a matter of fact. So he knows New Zealand like the back of his hand, Rolly.
Brilliant. All right, well, I'll bid you 73s, and good evening all. And thanks a lot, Chris, for the lovely evening again.
And thank you. And that's right on cue. That dissolved. So we go back to the camera on the stand there. Whoop. Sorry about this, folks. Takes a while to get it set up properly. There we go. Now I go back to the other screen. Switch off the backlight for that. And I just have enough time to close down for the evening. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. We've been conducting a Zoom meeting and trying to conduct a Zoom meeting as best we can, and live streaming, of course. So I'll just go over to the text on live stream just to have a look. Yeah, it's a pity you didn't get the passcode in time. I did type it up there. I don't know whether my text didn't come up. Mark Harrison, 0 in the passcode. Need to get Chris to use phonetics in future. I'll try. So I'll take a final listen on 2 metres before we close. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, just listening on 2 metres, 147.475. And I don't think anybody's there. No, with nothing heard, VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. now ending the stream for the evening, thanking everybody for being there. Mark Harrison, Terry 3FTJS, 3ADD, Mark Harrison, Tom George in Ballarat, Nick Presser, VK3BA. He's at Bannockburn and can just hear me on 2 metres. And hope to see you next week. As I say, next week we'll have what I think is a fairly interesting collection of films covering the period from the invention of the transistor, Bardeen, Brattain, Shockley, late 1940s, through to a documentary made by Fairchild about 1969 on the production of very early IC chips, including dual inline and the TO3 package, both of which they devised at Fairchild, and then a Texas Instrument documentary from the 1990s, rather more recent, rather more relevant to modern production techniques, which indicates the incredible precision with which they produce microchips now compared to those first microchips of the 1960s. So with that, I'll conclude the stream. Wish everybody a very good night, and we'll catch you next week. And we'll be looking into digital slow scan transmissions for those in Ballarat via the Ballarat repeater at a time to be organised. That'll be an interesting thing to try, particularly now that we have the new AVIF picture compression format that looks like it might eventually supersede the old JPEG. Does very much better on high compression. Again, if you want to look it up, look up the Alpha Victor India Foxtrot .avif extension picture compression codec. It was first released, I think, in late in 2019. It's very new. There are very few converters at the moment that will handle it, but if you put that through, if you put your pictures through the AVIF codec and transmit them with a digital transmitter like EasyPal or some similar modem, the results via HF digital slow scan are going to be so much better, or even via VHF. So this is Chris, VK3AML, wishing everybody all the best until next week. Cheers, fellas. And ladies, if anybody of the female gender is watching.